Hi folks, today I'm going to give you some tips and tricks for staining your deck. My deck is made of pine and it's about 15 years old, so I stain it about every 3 years. I use a transparent stain. I like the clear look, and you can see it's clearly in need of a stain. It will maintain your deck and keep it good for years to come. You can use a colored stain. You can give yourself probably another year between, probably 3 or 4 years for time between stainings. I'm a typical homeowner. I'm not an expert on this, so I'll just kind of give you things that have worked for me, that have allowed my decks to last as long as they have. It's going to be high 70s today. I like these kind of conditions for staining. It's sunny, somewhat cloudy, but mostly sunny day. Very low humidity. I think that's the important part. And no rain in the forecast. My wood is dry. For prep, I typically do very simple prep. I just clean any spots with the rag, soapy water, just water. I sweep it off, make sure there's no loose dirt. I don't pressure wash it, but you can if you want. There's a lot of debate as to whether pressure washing is good for wood or if it's bad. I just do it. I clean the deck and make sure it's nice and dry. It had a good day of drying off. There was no rain for the last couple days, so that's how I typically do it. And for me, I use a good quality stain. Like I said, clear, transparent stain. The important part for me is the prep. I've masked off all of my siding. I have vinyl siding, and if you take some time to do a good mask job, it makes your staining itself a much quicker process. I have some things on my deck that aren't easy to move, so I'm just going to keep them on my deck and just move them around as I get the staining done. It typically takes me, I don't know, better part of a day, probably 4 to 6 hours to do a complete job. I'm going to show you a few tricks. I like to use cloth vinyl glove, or not vinyl, but cloth gloves, or typical kind of cheap utility gloves, and I just dip them in the stain. I have a 5-gallon pail that I put 2 gallons at a time of stain together, mix it up really good, and then I just start with the top, obviously on the top part here, and I do the top caps and the railings, and then I go on my hands and knees and just do it with my glove. I just, basically waste a couple cheap terry gloves, and I use nitrile gloves inside there on my skin. Don't use latex. Latex will absorb the oil and the stain, and it'll balloon out and be useless in a very short time. So use nitrile gloves to protect your hands. You definitely want to do that. That's oil paint and oil stains, very bad for your hands. Alright, let's get started. Okay folks, so as you can see, I'm probably about halfway done. I like to do it in sections, so I take nitrile or vinyl glove, not latex, and I put one of these cheap utility gloves on top of it. It's just the way I do it, and I dip it in my stain, which is in a 5-gallon bucket. One word, if you think it's going to take 2 gallons or 3 gallons, take like 2 gallons at a time and dump them out, mix them up good in the 5-gallon to keep the color consistent. And then I just dip in that, and I go do the top railing first, then I do the spindles, and then the bottom vertical 2x4s, we'll call them, fascia, whatever you want to call them. Then I get down on my hands and knees and I do all of the top boards. And I'll go back around and I will get on a ladder and do the facing wood from the outside as well. And then I'll do the steps as well going down. So I'm hitting all the areas where anything's visible. I hit the joist and anything that's kind of facing the outside of it, top and bottom. Some tips: if you drip, I tend to gob it on there pretty good, and the wood will absorb. It's not like painting drywall. The wood's going to absorb the oil, so you don't have to worry about it being consistent. You can use a brush or roller if you want. I like using one of these gloves because I'm using the same thing. I can just transition immediately to doing every surface. I can get along the edges with this, whereas with a roller you can do the top boards faster, but obviously you're not doing the rest of it with rollers. So I like to use this glove for that. It's maybe a little slower in parts of it, but overall it's probably as fast, or if not faster, than using a roller. If you drip, by your bucket in an area that you've already done or one that you are about to do, make sure you just kind of get that drip, just spread the drip out and it won't show up. If you have a small drip sitting there and it dries and then you go over it later, you will see that drip later. Like I said, it's a nice 75-degree day, a little bit of breeze. It's drying slowly. It's not drying super slowly because there's very little humidity, so it's good conditions. It's comfortable for being out here, and it will dry fairly quick at this pace. If it's really hot and sunny beating down on you, it'll work, but the oil will dry quickly. And in some cases, I've seen where you get some marks where your kind of seams, I guess, of where you painted over, where you stained over, and then you come back later and join the two together. You will sometimes see those transition areas. So I like to do it when it's a little cooler and it dries a little bit slower, but it's still going to dry well before we're going to have any problems with rain or anything.